The architecture of American democracy rests on the principle of transparency, particularly concerning the forces that shape its foreign policy. The American public and its elected officials have a right to know not only what policies are being advocated, but on whose behalf that advocacy is conducted. It is this fundamental principle that animates the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA, a law designed to eliminate the role of foreign interests in the American political arena, enacted to ensure that the U.S. government and its people can evaluate political speech and lobbying efforts with full knowledge of their origins. FARA serves as a critical bulwark against undisclosed foreign influence. I will argue that the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, is one of the most powerful and effective lobbying organizations in the United States, particularly in Washington, where it conducts activities that fall squarely within the statutory definition of a foreign agent, an agent of a foreign principal. And as such, it should be required to register with the Department of Justice under said act. This is not an argument to prohibit AIPAC's activities, but to subject them to the same legal transparency required of other entities that act to advance the interests of foreign governments within the United States. The case rests on a meticulous examination of the law's text, its legislative intent, and a factual analysis of AIPAC's history, structure, and operational methods, which demonstrate a consistent and coordinated effort to advance the policy objectives of the government of the State of Israel. The Foreign Agents Registration Act, codified under 22 United States Code 611-621, is a public disclosure statute that requires individuals and entities engaged in political or advocacy work for foreign entities to register with the Department of Justice. The law does not prohibit any specific activities. Its purpose is to ensure that the United States government and the American people are aware of persons who are acting within this country as agents of foreign principles, so that their activities can be evaluated of their associations. This framework of transparency is the central pillar of the Act. The legal obligations under FARA are triggered when a person or an entity meets the definition of an agent of a foreign principal. This definition is intentionally broad, encompassing a wide range of relationships and activities far beyond formal contractual agreements. A, quote, foreign principal is defined to include a government of a foreign country, a foreign political party, any person or organization outside the United States, or any entity organized under foreign law or with its principal place of business in a foreign country. The government of Israel, its ministries, and its political parties unequivocally meet this definition. The crux of the legal analysis lies in the statutory definition of an, quote, agent of a foreign principal. FARA defines an agent as, quote, any person who acts as an agent, representative, employee, or servant, or any person who acts in any other capacity at the order, request, or under the direction or control of a foreign principal, end quote. The use of the disjunctive or is legally significant. It means that any of these conditions, order, request, direction, or control, is sufficient to establish an agency relationship. This broad phrasing obviates the need for prosecutors to prove a formal command and control hierarchy, such as direct payments from a foreign government or the presence of foreign officials on an organization's board. Indeed, the threshold for triggering FARA registration is remarkably low. A legal analysis and Department of Justice guidance have clarified a mere, quote, request from a foreign entity can be sufficient. A request from a foreign government official to arrange meetings with U.S. officials or to provide advice on how to influence United States policy can trigger the registration requirement, even in the absence of a contract or compensation. This quote unquote request standard is the legal central hook for analyzing AIPAC's activities. While AIPAC and its defenders frequently argue that the organization is not, quote, controlled by Israel because it is funded by American donors, this argument deflects from the other, less demanding prongs of the FARA test. The operative legal question is not whether the Israeli government controls AIPAC, but whether AIPAC acts at the request of or in the interests of the Israeli government. The evidence presented will demonstrate that AIPAC's activities consistently meet the standard. Once an agency relationship is established, the scope of registrable activities is extensive. An entity becomes a foreign agent if, at the request of a foreign principal, it engages in a number of specified activities within the United States. These include engaging in political activities. This is defined as any activity intended in any way to influence any agent or official of the United States government or any section of the American public with reference to the domestic or foreign policies of the United States of America or the political interests of a foreign government. This covers nearly all forms of lobbying and public advocacy. Acting as a, quote, political consultant, public relations counselor, or publicity agent includes informing or advising a foreign principal about the United States political conditions or disseminating information to the public on behalf of the principal. Representing the interests of a foreign principal applies to representation before any agency or official of the United States government. Soliciting or disbursing fund includes collecting or distributing money or other things of value in the interests of a foreign principal. An organization need only engage in one of these activities at the request of a foreign principal to be legally obligated to register. Upon registration, the agent must publicly disclose its relationship with the foreign principal, its activities, and its finances, and must label any informational materials it disseminates with a conspicuous disclaimer identifying the agent and the principal. This legal framework, with its broad definitions and low threshold for agency, was deliberately designed to cast a wide net, ensuring that all forms of foreign directed influence are brought into the light of public scrutiny. To fully appreciate the case for AIPAC's registration with the FARA Act, one must understand not only the letter of the Foreign Agent Registry Act, but also its legislative spirit and its historical evolution. The Act's journey from a tool against wartime propaganda to a modern instrument of lobbying transparency reveals a consistent congressional intent that aligns perfectly with subjecting an organization like AIPAC to its disclosure requirements. FARA was originally enacted in 1938 as the Foreign Propagandists Registration Act. Its primary impetus was the rise of National Socialist and Fascist propaganda circulating in the United States in the years preceding the Second World War. Congress, through the Special Committee of Un-American Activities, sought to expose the sources of this influence without infringing the First Amendment rights. The law's original purpose was not to censor or prohibit the propaganda itself, but to turn on the spotlight of pitiless publicity so that the American people could evaluate the information knowing it originated from a foreign source. In 1966, Congress significantly amended FARA, shifting its focus in a way that makes it directly applicable to the modern lobbying landscape. Spurred by an investigation by the State by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee into the lobbying activities of foreign sugar interests, the amendments reoriented this law from a narrow focus on propaganda and towards agents representing the broader economic and political interests of foreign principals. These changes broadened the law's exemptions to protect legitimate commercial activities, but strengthened the disclosure provisions for political lobbying. This evolution demonstrates a clear legislative intent to regulate precisely the kind of activity in which AIPAC specializes: sustained, well-funded political advocacy aimed at shaping United States foreign policy to benefit a specific foreign government. The Department of Justice's contemporary interpretation reinforces this purpose. The DOJ's FARA unit states that the law provides the public with an opportunity to be informed of the identity of persons engaging in political activities on behalf of foreign governments, foreign political parties, and other foreign principals, so that their activities can be evaluated in light of their associations. The principle of informed evaluation is the core of FARA. This context refutes the common argument advanced by AIPAC's defenders that the call for its registration is a quote-unquote bad faith interpretation or a quote-unquote trope used by Israel's critics intended to stigmatize the organization. Such a defense mischaracterizes the nature of the FARA Act. FARA registration is a neutral act of disclosure, not a punishment. It is not an indictment of an organization's mission. The FARA database contains over 450 active registrants, representing some 750 foreign principals, including many legitimate and non-controversial entities, such as the Japan National Tourism Organization, the Netherlands Board of Tourism and Conventions, and numerous law and public relations firms representing foreign commercial clients. These organizations are not considered nefarious for registering. They are simply complying with the United States transparency law. The resistance to registration, therefore, it is more revealing than the registration itself would be. If an organization's activities are, as it claims, purely in the interest of the United States, then transparently disclosing its relationship with a foreign government with which it has quote-unquote common interests should be an unremarkable administrative step. The strenuous opposition to this transparency suggests a desire to avoid the very public scrutiny that FARA was designed to create. The argument is not that AIPAC is inherently illegitimate and must be punished, but that it is functionally an agent of a foreign principle and must be transparent. The refusal to accept this basic tenet of democratic accountability is a rejection of the spirit of the law. If we examine AIPAC's activities to determine whether AIPAC meets the legal standard for registration under FARA, we must necessarily move from legal theory to a factual examination of the organization itself. A comprehensive analysis of AIPAC's origins, its operational structure, and its decades-long record of political intervention reveals an entity whose history is inextricably linked to the Israeli state, whose methods are those of a comprehensive influence campaign operating on behalf of a foreign agent. From its inception as a legal maneuver to evade FARA to its modern-day status as a financial and political behemoth, AIPAC's character and conduct align precisely with the activities which the law seeks to regulate. The American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee was not born from an organic grassroots movement of United States of American citizens. Its creation was a direct and calculated response to a United States government enforcement action aimed at regulating its predecessor as a foreign agent of Israel. The history establishes a foundational intent to serve the interests of a foreign government while deliberately structuring itself to avoid the corresponding legal transparency obligations. How does AIPAC's story begin? AIPAC's story begins with its founder, Isaiah L. C. Kennan. Before establishing AIPAC, Kennan was an employee of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, was a registered foreign agent for the government of Israel, a fact documented by the Department of Justice. Early in the 1950s, Kennan headed the American Zionist Council, a Washington-based organization that lobbied for United States aid to Israel. The American Zionist Council, however, came under the scrutiny of the Department of Justice for its close ties to the Israeli government. The pivotal moment occurred in 1962. The Kennedy administration's Justice Department, led by Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, formally determined that the American Zionist Council was acting as a conduit for funds from the Jewish Agency for Israel, which it considered an arm of the Israeli government. Consequently, the Department of Justice ordered the American Zionist Council to register as an agent of a foreign principal. This was an official finding by the U.S. government that the organization conducting pro-Israeli lobbying in Washington was in fact acting on behalf of the Israeli nation. Rather than comply with the registration order, the American Zionist Council leadership executed a strategic reorganization. The American Zionist Council was effectively dissolved, and its core lobbying functions were transferred to a new, ostensibly independent entity incorporated in Washington, D.C., the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee. The leader of this new organization was the same person, Isaiah Kennan, who had led the American Zionist Council, previously worked for the Israeli government. This sequence of events, it is not a historical coincidence. It is a clear and documented case of an organization restructuring itself specifically to circumvent a FARA registration order while continuing with the same mission with the same leadership. AIPAC was, in essence, created to serve as the American Zionist Council's unregistered successor. This history has led critics for decades to assert that it always has been, quote, an agent of the Israel government under the cloak of an American lobby group. This organization's legal argument that it is an American organization lobbying for Americans was a fiction crafted from its inception to address the specific legal challenge that led to the American Zionist Council's FARA order in the first place. This original sin of FARA evasion is not merely a footnote. It is a foundational stepping stone to understanding AIPAC's character. It demonstrates a clear historical intent to operate on behalf of a foreign principal while deliberately avoiding the transparency the law demands. Any contemporary assessment by the Department of Justice must weigh this history-calculated evasion quite heavily. These three components, financial power, narrative control, and direct lobbying, do not operate in isolation. They form a closed-loop influence machine, a self-reinforcing cycle designed to manufacture consent for the Israeli government's agenda. The process is systematic. First, AIPAC's electoral spending ensures a Congress populated with compliant lawmakers. Second, AIEF and their travel agency, those trips, indoctrinate these lawmakers with a curated pro-Israeli narrative. Thirdly, its lobbyists in Washington translate that manufactured worldview into concrete policy outcomes, such as aid packages and sanctions. This integrated system is far more sophisticated and powerful than that of a typical domestic interest group. It is the machinery of a foreign principal's agent working comprehensively to align the policies of the United States with the interests of its client. The evidence of AIPAC's operational method, while compelling, must be connected directly to the legal standards of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. The central question is whether the organization's activities are conducted at the order, request, or under the direction or control of the Israeli government. And if you examine the historical record, you find a consistent pattern of coordinated action and policy alignment that satisfies this statutory test. Furthermore, when AIPAC's conduct is compared to that of other entities that the Department of Justice has required to register under FARA, a stark double standard emerges, suggesting that AIPAC benefits from a political exemption to a law that should, by its own terms, apply to it. AIPAC's primary legal defense against FARA registration is the claim that it is an American organization paid by Americans that merely has quote-unquote common interests with the State of Israel. These common interests argument, however, functions as a straw man that misrepresents the nature of both the law and the evidence. The FARA statute does not require an entity to be foreign-funded or foreign-controlled. It only requires that it act at the request of a foreign principal. Moreover, the evidence demonstrates a relationship that goes far beyond parallel alignment of two independent actors. It shows a pattern of responsive, coordinated action where AIPAC functions as the implementation arm for the Israeli government's policy objectives in Washington. The historical record is replete with examples of this dynamic. One of the most clear-cut instances occurred in 1984 during the Reagan administration's proposed sale of Stinger anti-aircraft missiles to Jordan and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The Israeli government vehemently opposed the sale. According to academic analysis, Israeli officials directly contacted AIPAC's then leader, Thomas Dine, and requested that the organization work to, quote-unquote, fix the problem. AIPAC immediately launched a massive lobbying campaign on Capitol Hill. The result was a significant political victory for the Israeli government. The sale to Jordan was canceled, and the sale to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was dramatically curtailed. This is not a case of common interests. It is a textbook example of a domestic organization acting at the explicit request of a foreign government to alter United States foreign policy. This pattern of alignment is not an occasional occurrence. It is the defining feature of AIPAC's legislative agenda. It is the AIPAC's goals vary microscopically from one year to another and consistently reflect the top priorities of the sitting Israeli government. Whether the issue is stopping arms sales to Arab nations in the 1980s, pressuring the United States to adopt a secondary boycott against Iran in the 1990s, leading the charge to kill the Iran nuclear deal in the 2010s, or pushing for anti-boycott legislation in recent years, AIPAC's agenda has been functionally indistinguishable from that of the Israeli government. Moreover, the claim of common interest entirely when the interests of the United States and the Israeli government diverge. In such cases, AIPAC has consistently sided with the Israeli government's position, even to the detriment of stated U.S. policy or broader American strategic interests. The campaign against the nuclear Iran deal is a prime example. The Obama administration viewed the nuclear Iran deal as a critical U.S. national security interest, a view that it was even shared by the United States' European allies. AIPAC, aligning with Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu, worked to sabotage it. Similarly, scholars like John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt argued that AIPAC's influence has systematically diverted United States foreign policy. far from what the American national interest would otherwise suggest. When an organization consistently prioritizes the policy goals of a foreign government over the stated interests and policies of the United States, it is not acting on common interest. It is acting in the interests of a foreign principle, another key trigger for FARA registration. Of the AIPAC allegiance to Israel is further clarified by AIPAC's relationship with different Israeli political factions. The organization's loyalty is not to an abstract concept of Israel as a whole, if you will, but often to the specific right-wing political coalition in power. Multiple former Israeli prime ministers from more centrist or left-leaning parties like Yitzhak Rabin, Shimon Peres, or Ehud Olmert complained that AIPAC, working in concert with their then opposition, working in concert with Benjamin Netanyahu and the Likud party, actively worked to undermine their peace policies. This demonstrates that AIPAC does not represent a broad spectrum of Israeli views or even a consensus of a so-called Israeli interest, but rather it functions as the American lobbying arm for a particular faction within the Israeli politics. This level of partisan alignment within a foreign government's politics further solidifies AIPAC's status as an agent acting on behalf of a foreign political principle. The case for AIPAC's registration into FARA is made even more compelling when its activities are compared to those of other activities that the Department of Justice has prosecuted or forced to register under FARA. The law is only effective if it is applied consistently and without political favor. Yet, a recent review of FARA enforcement actions reveals a glaring double standard. Organizations and individuals have faced civil and criminal penalties for conduct that is functionally identical to, and often far similar in scale than the routine operations of AIPAC. This selective enforcement undermines the rule of law and suggests that AIPAC enjoys a de facto immunity from a statute that it should clearly apply to it. The DOJ has pursued FARA cases against individuals for a range of activities that mirror AIPAC's work. Take, for example, Paul Manafort and Richard Gates. They were prosecuted for their unregistered lobbying and public relations work on behalf of the government of Ukraine and their ruling political party. Lobbyist Samuel Patten was convicted for his political consulting work for a Ukrainian oligarch and a political party, which included arranging meetings with members of Congress and drafting op-eds to influence U.S. policy. More recently, lobbyist Barry Bennett entered into a deferred prosecution agreement for running a covert lobbying and PR campaign on behalf of one foreign government to disparage a regional rival. These activities, lobbying for a foreign government's policies, arranging meetings, and running influence campaigns are the core components of AIPAC's mission. Yet, AIPAC remains unregistered. The standard of acting at a foreign principal's request has also been central to recent enforcement. The Department of Justice filed a civil suit to compel a casino mogul, Steve Wynn, to register as a foreign agent for allegedly relaying a request from the People's Republic of China to President Donald Trump to have a Chinese national removed from the United States. If relaying a single request on behalf of a foreign government is grounds for a FARA lawsuit, then AIPAC's decades-long history of acting on request of Israel, such as the 1984 request to block the Stinger missiles sale to the Saudis, should trigger the same legal scrutiny. FARA has been applied to entities acting as publicity agents for foreign governments. State-controlled media outlets like Russia's Russia Today, RT, and China's CGTN America have been required to register under FARA for disseminating information and propaganda on behalf of their foreign principals. AIPAC functions as a massive publicity and public relations machine for the Israeli government. It disseminates a vast quantity of quote-unquote informational materials, including policy papers, legislative action alerts, online content, commercials, op-eds, all designed to promote a narrative favorable to the Israeli government policy. The travel agency, AEIF, those sponsored trips for lawmakers are in effect large-scale public relations events designed to shape the opinions of key United States decision makers. The argument for AIPAC's FARA registration extends beyond a mere technical legal analysis. It strikes at the heart of the United States' national interest. A sober assessment of the financial, strategic, and political costs associated with the United States-Israel relationship is shaped in its entirety by AIPAC influence, and this validates that premise. Far from being a mutually beneficial partnership, the relationship has become a significant strategic and financial liability for the United States, one that subordinates American interests to those of a foreign government and corrodes the integrity of the United States political process. The most tangible cost of the U.S.-Israel relationship is its immense and unprecedented financial burden on the American taxpayer. Israel receives the largest amount of money in regards of foreign assistance by the United States since World War II. To the date, the United States has provided Israel with over $158 billion in bilateral assistance and missile defense funding in non-inflation adjusted dollars. If you adjust that to inflation, it's over $300 billion. This aid is not a historical artifact. It is an ongoing and escalating commitment. Under the terms of a 10-year memorandum of understanding signed a few years ago, the United States is obligated to provide Israel with $38 billion in aid between the fiscal years 2019 and 2028, which breaks down to $3.3 billion foreign military financing grants and $500 million for missile defense programs annually. This annual $3.8 billion subsidy constitutes approximately 20% of the Israeli defense budget. Following the attacks on Hamas, this already staggering level of support surged dramatically. In the subsequent year, the United States spent at least $22.76 billion on military aid to Israel and related U.S. military operations in the region. This amount of money includes a $14 billion emergency supplemental aid package and at least $4 billion in drawdowns from the United States military stockpiles. This one-year expenditure is substantially more than in any other year since the U.S. began providing military aid to Israel. So the strategic costs of this special relationship are just as profound, if less easily quantified. Proponents of the relationship often claim that Israel is a vital strategic asset, the eyes and ears of America in the Middle East. However, a growing body of analysis from mainstream policy institutes argues for the opposite. Take, for example, the Cato Institute. They explicitly label the relationship as, quote-unquote, a strategic liability for the United States. The core of this argument is that Washington's unconditional and unwavering support for Israeli policies, as enforced by AIPAC's lobbying, severely undermines American interests. And the damage manifests itself in several ways. Firstly, it tarnishes the American global image and credibility. It provides diplomatic cover at the United Nations when the United States vetoes multiple ceasefire resolutions during the war in Gaza and supplies weapons used in a campaign that has resulted in widespread civilian casualties and destruction. The United States, then, and by consequence, is seen as complicit in actions that violate international law. This makes a mockery of claims about a US-led liberal international order and weakens Americans' ability to advocate for human rights and international law elsewhere in the world. Second, the relationship restricts the United States' strategic maneuverability, and it entangles it in regional conflicts. Washington's knee-jerk support for Israel has hindered its ability to engage diplomatically with other regional powers, particularly with Iran, and has repeatedly risked dragging the U.S. into a wider war, which has just happened. The Americans bombed Tehran at the behest and at the request of Bibi Netanyahu. This dynamic creates a situation where U.S. foreign policy is not driven by a clear-eyed assessment of American interests, but by the pathologies of this special relationship. Strategic and financial costs to the United States are a direct result of the co-opting of American lawmakers and policymakers, a process in which the AIPAC plays a central role. Through a combination of overwhelming financial pressure and the cultivation of a climate of fear, AIPAC ensures that on matters related to Israel, the priorities of the Israeli government supersede the judgment of U.S. officials and often the will of their own constituents. The enforcement of loyalty backed by the credible threat of political retribution is the mechanism by which the United States-U.S. political process is bent to serve a foreign agent. The evidence I have presented leads to the clear and unavoidable conclusion that the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee operates as an agent of a foreign principal and should be required by the Department of Justice of the United States to register under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. This conclusion is not based on animus or a desire to silence a political voice, but on a rigorous application of the U.S. law to a comprehensive body of factual evidence. The law is clear, the history is unambiguous, and the organization's activities align perfectly with the statutory definition of a foreign agent. The continued failure to enforce the law in this case represents a significant lapse in the application of justice and a disservice to the American public's rights to transparency in its governance. Okay? The argument for AIPAC's registration is built on four interlocking pillars. First, the letter and the spirit of the law are unequivocal. FARA's broad definition of an agent includes any entity that acts at the mere request of a foreign principal. Its purpose, refined over decades, is to ensure that all who engage in political lobbying on behalf of foreign interests are transparent about their relationships so that their advocacy can be properly evaluated. Registration is a neutral act of disclosure, not a punishment. Second, AIPAC's history and structure reveal a foundational intent to evade this very law. The organization was born directly out of a 1962 FARA enforcement action against its predecessor, the American Zionist Council. AIPAC was created as a legal maneuver to continue the exact same work, lobbying for the Israeli government while avoiding the registration that the Department of Justice had ordered. This history demonstrates a calculated effort to operate as a foreign agent while cloaked in the guise of a domestic organization. Third, AIPAC's activities are functionally identical to and often exceeding in scale in the conduct for which other entities have been prosecuted or forced to register under FARA. Like Paul Manafort, AIPAC lobbies for the policies of a foreign government. Like Steve Wynn, it acts on the requests of foreign officials. Like Russia Today and Chinese television, it functions as a massive publicity agent, disseminating informational materials and shaping public narratives on behalf of its principal. And unlike almost any other entity, it spends over $100 million per election cycle to install compliant lawmakers and remove critics of its foreign principles policies. The disparity in law enforcement is stark and indefensible. Fourth, the cost to American interests are profound. The relationship fostered by AIPAC's influence has become a massive financial and strategic liability for the United States, costing taxpayers hundreds of billions of dollars while undermining America's global standing and entangling it in regional conflicts. Its model of electoral retribution has co-opted the American political process and creates a chilling effect where lawmakers fear prioritizing United States interests over those of a foreign government. The failure to require AIPAC to register constitutes a case of selective enforcement that erodes the rule of law. It creates a special carve-out for the agent of one particular foreign country, while agents of others are held to the statute's requirements. This political favoritism is corrosive to the principles of equal justice, and democratic accountability. Therefore, the remedy is clear, the final solution is clear. The Department of Justice must apply the Foreign Agents Registration Act as it is written, consistently and without any political prejudice. It must require the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee to file a registration statement disclosing its relationship with its foreign principal, the government of Israel, and detailing its finances and political activities. This is not a radical proposal. Far from it, it is a simple call for the enforcement of a long-standing United States law. It is not about silencing a voice, but about correctly labeling it, so that the American people, their elected officials, and the media can finally evaluate its statements and activities with knowledge of the foreign interests they serve. Transparency is not a threat. It is the foundation of a healthy government